We are continuing the theme for this year, which is the Dirty Dozen, 12 character flaws. And the theme verse this year is 3 John verse 11a, which says, "Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good." And so the purpose of the study this year, with looking at these 12 characters who have character flaws, is to help us not to repeat their problems or to begin to deal with those issues in our own lives so that we don't get to the point that these people reached. One of the popular phrases today is release the beast. Especially in sports, it means to let out your primal animal instincts to go that extra mile in whatever you're doing. But some beasts need to remain in the cage. Rage should never be released. It is blind anger that strikes out at anything, and it is so destructive. You know, people who just in a blind rage, they knock things over, they say things that they shouldn't and can't take back, and they just do things that are terrible. Rage should not be released. Releasing all restraint and doing whatever you want usually means doing something wrong. When you indulge in your pleasures and your desires and the things that you just want to do, you wind up doing something to excess or doing something that you have no business doing. That should not be released. Unleashing your appetites will cause you to harm yourself. Now, I know it's a pattern with some church-going people that on Sunday, after they spent some time in church, they find a nice buffet. Do I need to go further? And they eat up everything. They don't know when to push themselves away from the table. And then later on, when they're taking Tums like candy, moaning and complaining about, "Oh, my stomach hurts," it goes back to the fact that they just released that beast. But that's one that should not be released. Jealousy also should remain caged. It's a poison that spreads in your heart and in your mind and comes out in your actions. There are many examples of jealousy in the Bible, but who comes to your mind as a prime example? Who? Okay, Cain, Saul, Ahaz. Who else? Ahab. Ahaz has some issues too. Well, if I show you the scriptures that we're using, you may be able to figure it out. Coming from 1 Samuel, King Saul. That's the person I have chosen to exemplify jealousy, because certainly he was poisoned by jealousy. And you can almost see jealousy spreading through his entire being as his story is unveiled in 1 Samuel. But what unleashed his jealousy? His jealousy came from at least 5 sources. And we're going to look at that today and see if that relates to you and me. So, first, Saul was jealous of David's success. Saul was jealous of David's success. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 48 through 51. Now you know most of the story, so I'm not including all of it. You know that David killed Goliath. You know that. But look at what verses 48 through 51 in 1 Samuel 17 says. So it was when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now, what I want you to see is that the young David, a teenager, killed Goliath. And Goliath was the champion of the Philistines. Goliath was a giant. He stood over 9 feet tall. So he was bigger than Dikembe Mutombo or any of the basketball. I mean, he would really rack up in the NBA. I mean, he's over 9 feet tall, and the basket is 10 feet. I mean, who could stop him, right? So he was the Philistine champion, and for 40 days he came to the army of Israel, because they were on one side of the valley, and the army of the Philistines were on the other side of the valley, up on the mountain. And he suggested, rather than both armies fighting, a whole lot of people getting killed, I represent the Philistines. Send me your champion, and we will fight together, and whoever wins, that army is the victor, and the other army would lose. 40 days he came, and no one would step up to the plate. Now, here's something that you need to be aware of. According to 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 2, when Samuel came to anoint Saul to be king, verse 2 says, "And he had a choice and handsome son whose name was Saul. There was not a more handsome person than he among the children of Israel. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people." Now that often gets overlooked. Do you realize that Saul, the first king of Israel, was the tallest Israelite? Now, he may not have been 9 feet tall, but he was the tallest Israelite. So when this giant Goliath comes and challenges the army of Israel, who should have stood up to the plate? Saul, right? I mean, he couldn't hide himself. That's why he went and hid himself among the sticks somewhere when Samuel wanted to anoint him king. But when you're tall, you stick out. Isn't that right? And who kills Goliath? Who answers the challenge of Goliath but a scrappy little teenager? Now, let me tell you something. If I, as a grown man, have a responsibility to do something, but I'm too chicken to do it, and some little scrappy teenager does it, how do you think I'm going to feel? I'm going to be embarrassed, for one. I'm going to be angry, for two, and I might be a little jealous, don't you think? And so when we see that David slays Goliath, Saul had to be jealous of his success. And I think about Saul. Not a single soldier of his would step up to the plate. And David comes and he's mouthing off, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that defies the army of the living God?" And word gets back to Saul. "Saul, there's somebody who's willing to go out and fight. I'm glad it's not me." And Saul says, "I'm glad it's not me either." And when David is brought to him, I'd be scratching my head. Now, how is this going to look? First of all, the hopes of Israel is on this little teenager. Now, if he gets stomped and crushed by Goliath, then the fate of the whole nation is ruined. But what's going on in Saul's mind is, I don't want this to fall on me. I don't want to be the one to have to go out there against Goliath because I don't think I have a chance. And so David represents Israel and he wins the battle. You know what this says about David? David had more guts and more faith than the whole army of Israel. And again, when you are in a position of leadership and someone has more guts than you as the leader, how does that make you feel? And so Saul is thinking about this. And he's running it through his mind. It should have been him. Saul should have stood up to Goliath and represented the people, because after all, Samuel told him that he was anointed by God to be king. All right, how does this relate to you and me? Don't envy the success of others, especially when fear has grabbed hold of you. Like in this case, when you're too afraid to do something and somebody else has success, why are you going to turn around and be jealous of them? You had your chance. You bailed out. So, this is the beginning of jealousy in the heart of King Saul. Second, Saul was jealous of the bond between David and Jonathan. Jonathan was Saul's son. Look at chapter 18 of 1 Samuel, verses 1 through 4. Now, when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house anymore. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan took off the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, even to his sword and his bow and his belt. Now, in a sense, David and Jonathan became soul brothers. Jonathan, who was the prince, elevated David to a status of equality, of friendship. And Jonathan became protective of David, because when Saul went off the deep end and wanted to kill David, it was Jonathan who came to David's defense. And you know that really ticked Saul off. Chapter 20, verse 30. This is when Jonathan made an excuse for David not to be at this dinner that King Saul was having, because Saul was planning to kill David. And this is what Saul says. Then Saul's anger was aroused against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness?" He was angry at his own son. He was jealous of the relationship that Jonathan had with David. Now think back to your own childhood, or more specifically, your teenhood. Did you ever have a friend that your parents didn't approve of? It's quiet in here. I know you had some. What's wrong with you people this morning? You can't tell me you didn't have a friend that your parents said, I don't want you hanging around with that person. All right, you know where I'm coming from? And what did you do? Okay, Mom, I'll listen to you. Then you said, no, what's wrong with so-and-so? That's my friend. And you would go and you would defend your friend. Right? I mean, y'all hadn't done that. Don't be my friend then. I know I have one defender in here. Caroline will defend me. But let's be honest. You would defend your friend from things that were said about him or her, even to your own parents. And sometimes parents get upset. I'm a parent, and I haven't always approved of all the friends that my kids had. But you can become jealous because they don't listen to you, and they seem to listen to their friends over you. And so King Saul is working this out. He gets so angry at his own son and says, you're not acting like a child of mine, and you prefer David over my family. What's wrong with you? And so jealousy is spreading and poisoning this man. Well, what does that mean for you and me? Don't try to control relationships. Jealousy often comes when we try to control somebody else. You're mine. I don't want you hanging around with nobody else. Right? I saw you talking to so-and-so, and you don't know what they were talking about. But you get jealous. You feel threatened because you're trying to control a relationship. Don't you know you don't own anybody? And I hate to say this, but if somebody wants to leave you for somebody else, what can you do about it? You can't control that. And so when we try to control a relationship, like Saul was trying to control his son, he wanted his son to be in his camp to kill David. You can't control relationships. You can't control people. You have a hard enough job trying to control yourself. So deal with yourself. And if somebody, a friend, a spouse, I hope that doesn't happen in the Christian family, but I've just heard recently of so many Christian marriages ending in divorce. It just breaks my heart. If somebody wants to leave, let them go. Oh, I'll be nicer to you. Oh, I'll do this. You start changing your game. Be who you are. And if who you are isn't good enough for them, then let them go. Be true to what God wants you to be. Don't try to change yourself to please somebody else, and don't try to lock them up in the basement. Like what's that TV channel? Somebody help me. Was it L something? Yeah, Lifetime. I was introduced to that channel unwillingly by my adopted mom, Maddie Vereen, and she would watch that. She watched it all the time. And when it first came out, it was like a female answer to all the abuse. And you'd see this story about this man locked up in the basement. He had a chain, and she would throw a bowl to him to eat. She was, and like the Diary of a Mad Black Woman, all those kinds of things where somebody is trying to control the relationship with somebody else. If you got to go through all that, that's not love. If I have to chain you to keep you home, I don't need you. You know, if I want a pet, I'll get a dog. I mean, but people have in their mind, I'm not going to let you go. I'm going to control this. Whatever I have to do to keep you, I'm going to keep you. And all you're doing is snuffing out that person's life and minimizing your own. Jealousy. Jealousy will poison you. Third, Saul was jealous of the praise David received. Now, this is what usually you think of when you think of Saul being jealous. And this is chapter 18, verses 5 through 7. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Now it happened as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women had come out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Saul didn't like that hit. It may have gone to number 1 on the charts, but he wasn't feeling that. Now notice it says that Saul had slain his thousands. Now, you know, all this is exaggeration. Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000. So the point of the song was that David was 10 times better than Saul. And Saul understood that. He didn't take kindly to that. And it caused him to become jealous. You know, when people throw out praise to somebody else and they kind of ignore you, that's prime ground for jealousy to form in your heart. So you work around the church and you do this and you do that, and brother so-and-so, for once in his life, does something. And everybody says, oh, did you see what brother so-and-so did? Oh, he's a blessing to the church. And you're saying, well, I work every Sunday. I have been faithful, and nobody ever says anything about me. And so like they used to do up in New York, where I grew up, when we played ball, if I didn't get chosen, or I got stuck on the rotten team, I'd take my ball and go home. And so some people do that in church. Oh, I don't get recognized. Well, I'm not going to do anything else. I'm going to go to another church. You take your ball and you go home. Well, who are you playing for? Are you playing for God? Are you playing for the praise of man? Saul was really bothered by that song. I can hear him. I mean, I can picture this. I know it's not in the Bible. All right, so I say that right now. It's not in the Bible. But I can imagine him laying down on his kingly bed, and in the middle of the night, oh, what's that song? Saul is slain thousands, and David 10,000s. Oh, I hate that song. You know, you ever get a song you can't get out of your mind? That song was in his mind. And it just fed his jealousy. But it just showed that he was a small man. The other side of that, we need to be careful when we praise people. Because we can inadvertently offend somebody else. You try to think of everybody, you know, like at the Emmys or the Oscars. well, I thank so-and-so and I thank so-and-so. You know, they have a list. And if they leave somebody out, they're going to hear it. We have to be careful with our praise. But when somebody is praised more than us, we shouldn't be bent out of shape about it. And so, what happened here? Don't live for the praise of man. If you want to avoid being jealous, don't live for the praise of man. Fourth, Saul became suspicious of David. Now it's really getting deep. Chapter 18, verses 8 through 13, and then chapter 19, verse 1. Then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him, and he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Well, first of all, buddy, you didn't kill that many. And David didn't kill that many either. All David killed was one person. So you are letting this go to your head. You're creating something that's not really there. Now, what more can he have but the kingdom? Now, David didn't say this. David didn't claim it. It's these women that are singing this song, and now he's already afraid that his kingship is in jeopardy. Verse 9. So Saul eyed David from that day forward. In other words, he put a spy on David. He kept his eye on David. He looked at everything that David did, and he, in a sense, was not micromanaging, but he was he had his magnifying glass on and looked at everything that David was doing. Now, you know the problem with that, I've used this illustration before, that if you ever are placed in a mental institution and you try to prove that you are not insane, the more you talk about it, the more you try to show that you're not insane, the more they say, well, that's just proof you are insane. It was like when I was in the hospital with my heart issues, and I'm trying to tell them I'm ready to go home. All right, you've done enough. Let me go home. And the more I talked about going home, the more they say, no, you need to stay. You've experienced that, right? You know, when you're trying to explain yourself out of something, it's like everything that you say is just giving them evidence to say, no. This doesn't change anything. And so here Saul is. He is eyeing David with a suspicious eye. Verse 10. And it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand, as at other times, but there was a spear in Saul's hand. Now, when Saul would be attacked with this spirit, and he'd go off, it was David who would play his harp and calm the savage beast. So David was doing his thing that like he had always done. But this time there was a spear in his hand. Verse 11. And Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. Now for me, it will only have been once. Saul wouldn't have gotten a second chance to throw a spear at me. This guy's crazy. I'm not hanging around here anymore. But David's a better man than me. Now, Saul was afraid of David. Now, Saul throws a spear at David, and David ducks twice, right? Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Therefore, Saul removed him from his presence and made him his captain over 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. Now, it's very easy to miss this, but do you know what Saul did? He demoted David. Look back at verse 3. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely, and Saul set him over the men of war. So, he made David the general. He was over all the men of war. But now you see, he's just captain over 1,000. That's a demotion. Amen. He is demoting David because he feels that David is going to take his place. He is suspicious of everything that David's doing. All David's doing is, Saul, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. And David behaved himself wisely before Saul. But that doesn't matter. When you are filled with envy, when you have jealousy in your heart, you don't see the good in somebody. All you see is how they're trying to rip you off, or how they're trying to be better than you, how they are stepping in your territory. And that's how he is interpreting all the events that are going on. Jealousy poisons the way that you see people. And what does that have to do with you and me? Jealousy can cause you to imagine things. Really? You see things that are not really there. A person does something innocently, and you think that they are doing something horrible to try to hurt you. And so you come into a room and you see so-and-so whispering. Oh, they're talking about me. They ain't thinking about you. But you're so jealous that you think they have to be talking about you. And so you begin to imagine, oh, I wonder what they're saying. They must be saying this, that, and the other about me. And you imagine, you create things. That's what jealousy will do. It will cause you to see things that are not really there. And certainly we see this poison spreading through Saul, where he is creating the scenario that David's out to get him. David's out to replace him. That David's going to do something to undermine his authority. That I better get David before David gets me. That's, he's imagining things. But jealousy can do the same thing for you and me if we think about it, give it some thought. Fifth and finally, David behaved better than Saul. You really want to make somebody jealous when you are a better person than they are? That really makes them jealous. So they're trying to do dirt to you, and you don't respond, or you respond in kindness and love. That burns them up. How can you be like that? I can't stand your guts, and you still are nice to me? Well, look at what happens here. Chapter 18, 1 Samuel, verses 14 and 15. And David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Therefore, when Saul saw that he behaved very wisely, he was afraid of him. Why was he afraid? Because he knew that David was a better man. Later on, as the story continues to unfold, Saul has got his army, and they're chasing David. And David is hiding from Saul. David's in a cave. Saul comes into the cave to relieve himself. And David cuts off a piece of his robe. And he's quiet, and Saul doesn't know that he's in there. And if David was out to take him out, he could have done it right then. Because the army was outside of the cave and Saul was inside the cave. Saul goes back out, goes to his army. David comes out of the cave. And he says, Saul, why are you chasing me? I'm just a dog. I'm just a flea. Why are you chasing after me? And he said, while you were in the cave, I could have killed you. And he holds up the piece of his his robe. He says, see? But I know better than to touch the Lord's anointed. Far be it from me to do anything to you, Saul. I'll never touch you. You don't have to worry about me trying to off you. It's not going to happen. So why are you still chasing me? And Saul in front of his army says, oh, is that you, my son, David? You are a better man than I am. And he promised not to chase after David. But a couple of chapters later, he does it again. Because David was a better man than Saul, it had to eat at his heart. How can this guy be like this? You know, it's a lot easier to deal with an enemy that hates you as much as you hate them. But when you have someone who you consider your enemy and they are cool, calm, and collected, they smile and it's a genuine smile. They will do nice things to you. That gets on your nerve. It's hard to be mean to somebody who's treating you nice. You want them to be mean because that gives you justification to do what you want to do against them. And so this is burning Saul up, that David would behave himself so wisely, and the fact that the Lord is with David and no longer with Saul. But this is how jealousy works. What does it mean for you and me? You can't beat one who walks in the will of God. You realize that? If someone is behaving themselves wisely, it means that they are following the Word of God. And you can't beat them. You're on the wrong side. And so, if you are tempted to be jealous of someone who's behaving themselves better than you, you better open your eyes and see that they are under the anointing of the Lord. You better see that they are walking in the will of God. And like Gamaliel said in Acts, I believe chapter 5, you don't want to be one who's trying to box with God. You don't want to be the one fighting against God. Because you know you're not going to win that battle. Ali may have said that he was the greatest, but God is the greatest. Because God has never lost a battle. He's never lost a fight. He is he's infinity and zero. So you don't want to be on the wrong side of that. Don't let jealousy cause you to oppose someone who's walking in the will of God. Let me say this. No good thing comes out of being jealous. Rather, it is the ugly side of us. So what do I want you to remember? Jealousy releases the monster in us. When you are jealous, that monster thing that's inside of you comes out. And it is ugly. You know, have you ever seen a cute monster? I'm not talking about your grandchildren. I mean, have you ever seen a cute monster? No, monsters are ugly. They're scary. Right? And they are destructive. Jealousy is a monster. Don't let that monster out. Sisters and brothers, if you are jealous of someone, confess it as sin. Be happy for the other person unless their success is a result of wickedness. In that case, pray for justice, and you shouldn't be jealous of them anyway. Resist jealousy when it rears its ugly head, and don't let it poison you. Be satisfied with what the Lord has entrusted to you, and be faithful. Now, if you're not a Christian, you need to acknowledge that jealousy is a sin because it is a form of covetousness and certainly a lack of love. If you never place your faith in Jesus, jealousy is enough to condemn you to spend eternity in hell separated from God. But you can avoid that destination by confessing your sins, believing that Jesus died for you, repenting, and then receiving Jesus as your Savior. If you've never done that, I encourage you not to wait. Place your faith in Jesus today. I'll have at the back table cards to remind you of this message. And on the back it says, neutralizing the poison of jealousy. It will be a restatement of these 5 points. But if you'd like to have a card, it'll be on the back table. Let's close in prayer.